The alarm on Vathon's watch had not sounded in 11 years, and when it finally did, nobody on the graveyard shift believed it was real. Sub-Prefect Ilra Chesto was the first to reach the sensor deck, her claws still damp from the ration-line coffee she'd abandoned mid-sip. The screen in front of her showed a shape too large to be a rock and too silent to be a threat. A vessel, drifting out of the black at the edge of Coalition space, radiating the cold, dead heat signature of something that had been powered down for a very long time. "No transponder," the duty officer said, voice tight. "No registry match. Nothing in the archive even close." Ilra leaned over his shoulder and stared at the outline, resolving pixel by pixel on the display. The hull was long, brutal, scarred along its flanks by weapons fire that had long since scarred over like old wounds on skin. It looked less like a ship, and more like something that had survived a war nobody remembered fighting. "Get me a probe," she said. "Now." Her superiors were still asleep in their quarters 2 decks up, and by the time anyone with more rank than her woke to argue about protocol, Ilra had already launched the drone. That was the kind of officer she was, quick, capable, and perpetually one impulsive decision away from either a promotion or a court-martial. Tonight, she told herself, it would be the former. The probe's camera feed crawled down the derelict's hull, past pitted armor plating and blast scoring that made her stomach tighten. Then it found the name, faded, half-scorched, stamped in characters that matched no known galactic alphabet. "Run it through the linguistic core," she muttered. The system chewed on it for 11 seconds before spitting back 3 words in the Coalition's trade tongue. Possible translation, Iron Star. Ilra had grown up on stories about ghost ships. Every species had them. Vessels found empty, crews vanished, cargo intact, as if the universe had simply reached in and plucked the people out. She had never believed a word of it. She believed it a little more now. "Boarding team," she said. "Full protective gear. I'm leading it myself." The airlock breached easier than it should have. No resistance, no alarms, just a soft hydraulic sigh as ancient metal remembered how to open. Ilra stepped through first, weapon drawn, helmet lamp cutting a narrow cone through dust that hadn't been disturbed in what her instruments were now suggesting, impossibly, was centuries. The corridors were built wrong. Not badly, just differently. Proportioned for a species with roughly her own height but broader shoulders, ceilings low enough to feel deliberate rather than cramped. Faded murals lined some of the walls, images of a blue and green world half obscured by grime, and rows of dark view screens that flickered faintly to life as her team passed, as if the ship were opening one eye at a time to watch them. "Life support's active," her engineer reported, awe cracking his professional tone. "Barely, but active. Something's been keeping this ship alive. They found the bodies first, or rather, they didn't." 12 decks in, they found empty crew quarters, personal effects frozen in place like a museum exhibit, a child's drawing pinned above a bunk, a half-finished letter on a data slate, a pair of boots set neatly by a door that would never again be opened by their owner. No skeletons, no blood, just absence, curated and precise, as though the crew had simply stepped out for a moment 300 years ago and never come back. "This isn't a wreck," Ilra said quietly. "This is a tomb somebody sealed on purpose." They found the chamber at the heart of the ship, past 3 sets of blast doors that had to be cut open 1 careful centimeter at a time. Inside, bathed in a soft blue glow, stood a single cryopod, its surface clouded with frost, a heartbeat monitor beside it ticking with slow, patient rhythm. Ilra's engineer went pale. "That thing's reading a life sign." She stared through the frosted glass at the shape inside, humanoid, unmistakably alive, chest rising and falling in unhurried sleep. A nameplate was fixed beneath the pod, etched in the same unreadable script as the hull. "Translate it," she ordered. The system worked longer this time. When the answer came, it didn't make sense to anyone in the room. Commander Braxis Kell, species, human, vessel, ISS Iron Star, status, preserve until recalled. "Human," the engineer repeated. "There's no listing for that species anywhere in the archive. Not one." Ilra's mouth had gone dry. Regulations were clear. Anything of this significance required fleet authorization before disturbance. She knew the rule. She'd recited it in training 100 times. She reached for the release mechanism anyway. Sub-prefect, her engineer started. "If we leave and come back with permission," she said, "and this thing wakes on its own in the meantime, I want it to see a friendly face first. Not a security squad." She placed her palm against the release panel. "Override. Authorization Chesto, Ilra, Sub-Prefect, Coalition Border Authority." The pod hissed. Frost cracked and slid away in sheets. Somewhere deep in the ship far below them, something that had been sleeping for centuries began, very deliberately, to wake up. At first it was subtle, a hum in the deck plating, a shift in air pressure, lights along the corridor brightening by a fraction of a degree. Then the ship's systems came online in a cascading wave that rolled from bow to stern like a held breath finally released. Banks of long, dead displays flaring to life one after another down every corridor they had walked. "System status," Ilra snapped, backing away from the pod as the cryoglass hissed open in a final release of vapor. Her engineer's voice cracked. "Sub-Prefect, I'm reading power distribution across the entire ship. Weapons arrays, engine cores, all of it. This thing wasn't dead. It was waiting." A mechanical voice rolled through the corridor speakers, deep and resonant, speaking in a language none of their translators could parse, clipped, deliberate, unmistakably a challenge rather than a greeting. And beneath it, layered underneath the words like a second heartbeat, came a sound every soldier in the boarding party recognized instantly, in any language, from any species, across any span of centuries. Weapons systems, spooling up, all across the ship, arming themselves around them. The man in the cryopod opened his eyes before the frost had fully cleared from his skin, and the first thing he did was locate every exit in the room. Ilra watched him do it, a slow, disciplined sweep, head barely moving, eyes doing all the work. Not the reaction of someone waking from a coma. The reaction of a soldier assessing a hostile room, even half frozen and barely able to stand. "Don't move," she said, weapon still raised, though her voice had lost most of its conviction. "We're not here to hurt you." The man, Braxis Kell according to the nameplate, braced a hand against the pod's frame and pulled himself upright with visible effort, muscles trembling from disuse. He was breathing hard, sweat beading on skin gone pale from decades, maybe centuries, of stillness. But his eyes, when they finally settled on Ilra, were sharp and terrifyingly calm. "Where's my crew?" he said. Not a question. A demand, rasped through a throat that hadn't spoken in longer than anyone in the room could imagine. "There's no one else aboard," Ilra said carefully. "Just you." Something moved behind his eyes. Grief, maybe, or the beginning of it, quickly locked down and put away, the way a man puts away a weapon he doesn't have time to use yet. He looked past her, taking in the boarding team, their armor, their unfamiliar weapons, the alien cut of their faces. "What's your designation?" he said. "Vornax? Coalition? Something new?" "Coalition Border Authority," Ilra said. "I'm Sub-Prefect Ilra Chesto. You're aboard your own ship. We found you drifting." "Drifting?" He repeated the word like it tasted wrong. "How long?" Ilra hesitated, and that hesitation told him more than any answer could have. His jaw tightened. "How long?" he said again, quieter, and somehow more dangerous for it. "We don't know yet," she admitted. "Your hull configuration, the alloy composition, the linguistic drift on your ship's markings. Our best estimate puts you at somewhere between 600 and 1,000 years outside of any recorded timeline. There's no listing for your species, no listing for your ship, nothing." For a long moment, Braxis said nothing at all. Then slowly the tension in his shoulders shifted. Not into panic, as Ilra had expected, but into something colder and more focused, the look of a man recalculating a battle plan on the fly. "Iron Star," he said. "Systems check. Weapons hold at ready. Non-hostile posture unless fired upon." He said it to the empty air, and to Ilra's astonishment, The arming hum she'd heard moments earlier softened, the sharp mechanical edge in the ship's tone easing into something closer to watchful silence. "You can talk to your ship," she said. "She's the only crew I've got left," Braxis said. "Until I know different." He looked back at Ilra, and for the first time something like genuine curiosity crossed his exhausted face. "You could have shot me the second I opened my eyes, or gassed the room. Instead, you're standing there arguing with your own trigger finger." "I don't shoot things I don't understand," Ilra said. "Not until I have to." Something that might have been the ghost of a smile touched the corner of his mouth. "That's a good way to survive," he said. "Also a good way to get yourself killed. Depends on who you're dealing with." It took 2 hours to get him walking steadily, another 3 to get him talking freely, and by the end of it, Ilra had learned less than she wanted and more than she was prepared for. Braxis Kell was a naval commander, human, from a homeworld he called Earth, a name that meant absolutely nothing to any database Ilra had access to. His last clear memory was a war. Not a border skirmish, not a resource dispute, but a war of extermination against something called the Vornax Dominion, an enemy he described in clipped, careful sentences, as if even the memory of them required discipline to hold steady. "They didn't negotiate," he said, sitting now in what remained of the ship's officer mess, hands wrapped around a ration pack Ilra's team had given him. "They didn't conquer. They erased. Whole systems gone, not a signal left behind. We weren't the first world they hit. We weren't going to be the last either. Not if we lost." "And the Iron Star?" Ilra asked. "Black Ops project. Deep stealth, long endurance, built to survive when everything else didn't. My orders were simple. Go dark, stay hidden, and if the war turned against us, come back and finish what the rest of the fleet couldn't." He looked down at his hands. "I went into that pod expecting to wake up in a few years. Maybe a decade, if things went badly." "It's been longer than a decade," Ilra said gently. "So it seems." His voice didn't waver, but something in his eyes did. "Pull up your coalition's founding records. I want to see when your alliance was established. Compare it to my last mission date." Ilra hesitated only a moment before keying the request into her wrist terminal, more to give him the dignity of proof than because she doubted him. The coalition's public archive was vast, meticulously kept, proud of its unbroken chain of history stretching back to the founding charter. The founding charter that, when she pulled up the relevant section on Earth's era, produced nothing. Not a gap, not a blank entry waiting to be filled. A hard, sealed block of redacted text, stamped with a clearance rating so high Ilra had never seen its like outside of training simulations designed to teach cadets what don't even think about it looked like. She stared at it for a long moment, feeling something cold settle low in her stomach. "That's not a missing record," she said slowly. "That's a record somebody went to enormous trouble to bury." Braxis set down the ration pack, all traces of exhaustion suddenly gone from his face, replaced by something far more focused. "Show me," he said. Ilra turned her wrist terminal toward him, and together they stared at the seal, a black rectangle where a species' entire history should have been, dated to the exact era he'd described, locked behind a clearance level that didn't officially exist on any organizational chart she had ever seen. "Somebody erased you," she whispered. "On purpose." The mess hall lights flickered once, and the ship's low ambient hum shifted almost imperceptibly, like something enormous quietly clearing its throat in response to a threat it recognized before either of them did. Fleet Admiral Doran Vask arrived aboard Vathon's watch with 4 warships, a legal team, and the unmistakable bearing of a man who had never once lost an argument he cared about winning. Ilra watched his shuttle dock from the observation deck, arms folded, already certain how this was going to go. Vask was a legend in coalition circles, decorated, photogenic, politically untouchable, the kind of officer whose name got attached to peace treaties and press conferences in equal measure. He was also, in her admittedly limited experience, the kind of man who treated inconvenient discoveries the way a surgeon treated infected tissue. Cut it out, quickly, quietly. before it could spread. "Sub-Prefect Chesto," he said when he found her, his smile warm enough to be believable to anyone who hadn't seen his eyes first. "I understand you've had quite the eventful week." "Admiral." She kept her tone professional. "The Iron Star and Commander Kell are stable. He's cooperative, but he hasn't relinquished command of his vessel." "He won't need to relinquish anything," Vask said smoothly. "We're simply taking the ship into protective custody. Standard containment procedure for an unregistered vessel of unknown origin and armament." "With respect, sir, he's not unregistered. He's just old. Old enough that—" "That's precisely the concern," Vask cut in, still smiling. "A weapon of unknown capability, from an unknown era, awakened without authorization." His eyes flicked toward her, just briefly, just enough. By an ambitious young officer acting well outside her clearance. Ilra held her ground. "The Coalition's own founding charter references a redacted section from that exact era, Admiral. I'd be very curious to hear what protective custody is actually protecting." Something flickered behind Vask's practiced calm. Gone in an instant, but she'd seen it. He knew exactly what she was talking about. "Curiosity is a fine trait in an officer," he said. "Insubordination is not. I'll be assuming direct command of this situation from here." Braxis received Vask on the Iron Star's bridge, standing rather than sitting, arms loose at his sides in a posture Ilra was beginning to recognize as deceptively relaxed. The stance of a man who had already calculated 4 different ways the next 5 minutes could go badly, and was prepared for all of them. "Admiral," Braxis said, before Vask could open with whatever prepared statement he'd brought. "I've read your Coalition's Article 9 Charter on Sovereign Salvage Rights. Section 12, specifically, vessels reactivated under their own power, commanded by a living, competent officer of record, retain full sovereignty pending formal review by a tribunal of no fewer than 3 seats, not 1 admiral with 4 warships." The bridge went very quiet. Vask's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. A fast, hard recalculation, the look of a man who had just watched his easy solution evaporate. "That's remarkably specific knowledge," Vask said slowly, "for someone who woke up 3 days ago." "I had a lot of time to study Coalition maritime law," Braxis said, "back when it was still being drafted." The silence that followed was different from the one before it, heavier, charged with a realization spreading through the bridge crew like cold water. Vask stared at Braxis for a long moment, and Ilra watched, fascinated despite herself, as the Admiral's practiced composure cracked just slightly at the edges. "That's not possible," Vask said quietly. "That charter is nearly 900 years old." "Then I suppose we're roughly the same age," Braxis said. "Give or take a nap." Vask didn't answer right away. He glanced at his legal team, then at Ilra, then back to Braxis. And for the first time since arriving, he looked less like a politician holding court, and more like a man standing at the edge of something he didn't fully understand and very much did not want to fall into. "I'll need to consult with Fleet Command," he said finally tightly. "This changes the situation considerably." He left without another word, his legal team trailing behind him in confused silence, and Ilra noted, filed away carefully, the way she filed away every useful detail these days, that Vask hadn't looked surprised that Braxis knew old Coalition law. He'd looked afraid. She found the archivist 2 hours later, in the lower records deck of Vathon's watch, a quiet, elderly Coalition clerk named Fessa, who had spent 40 years cataloging history nobody else cared to read. Ilra had helped her once years ago with a data corruption issue nobody else had bothered to fix. Fessa remembered. "You're asking about the silence accord," Fessa said, not looking up from her console, voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Ilra's pulse quickened. "I don't know what that is. I found a redacted section in the founding charter and I—" "Then stop looking." Fessa finally met her eyes, and what Ilra saw there wasn't caution. It was fear, old and deeply worn, the kind that came from watching something happen once and never forgetting it. "There was another archivist, decades before me. He asked the questions you're asking now. He filed a formal inquiry with Fleet Command. She paused. He was reassigned within the week. Nobody ever heard from him again. Not a message, not a record, nothing. What is the Silence Accord? Ilra pressed. Fessa's hands trembled slightly over the console. I don't know the details. Nobody below tribunal clearance does. But I know the name attached to it because it's the one word in this entire archive that appears in every redacted file from that era, over and over, like a signature. She lowered her voice further still. Earth. Aboard the Iron Star, alone in the ship's damaged records bay, Braxis finally found what he'd been searching for. A partially corrupted data core, buried deep in emergency storage, marked with his own service designation. His hands weren't quite steady as he keyed it open. The screen flickered, resolved, and began to play. A face he recognized appeared, his old fleet commander, gaunt, exhausted, recording what was clearly meant to be a final report. Braxis leaned forward, breath caught in his throat as the recording began. If you're seeing this, Kel, then the Iron Star made it out. Good. Because someone needs to carry what happened next. The Vornax are broken. We won. But the cost. The bridge doors burst open behind him. Braxis spun, hand instinctively moving toward a weapon that wasn't there, as 4 coalition soldiers stormed onto the bridge with rifles raised, Vask's voice barking orders through their comm channels. Behind him, the recording kept playing, his old commander's voice cracking with something between triumph and grief. Right at the exact moment the screen went dark, the data core, disturbed by the sudden power surge from the breach, corrupting itself into silence before Braxis could hear a single word of how the war had truly ended. Braxis didn't reach for a weapon. He reached for the ship instead. Iron Star, he said calmly, as 4 rifles tracked his every movement. Seal bridge access, deck 12 through 15, non-lethal countermeasures only. The lights dimmed, not dramatically, just enough. The soldiers' rifle sights flickered and died in perfect unison. Their targeting systems scrambled by something the ship did so quietly. None of them even noticed the moment it happened. Gravity shifted a fraction of a degree under their boots, subtle enough to throw balance without anyone falling, disorienting enough that 2 of the 4 soldiers stumbled and had to catch themselves against the bulkhead. This ship is 900 years more advanced than anything your engineers have ever reverse-engineered, Braxis said, voice level, almost conversational, as he stepped calmly toward the lead soldier. I could kill everyone on this bridge without lifting a finger. I haven't. Think carefully about what that tells you before your next move. The soldiers hesitated, glancing at each other, weapons still raised, but no longer steady. Commander Kell. Vask's voice came over the comm, tight with barely restrained frustration. Stand down your ship's systems immediately. Call off your boarding party first, Braxis replied. You brought guns onto my bridge, Admiral. I brought patience. I'd say I'm winning that exchange. There was a long pause. Then, reluctantly, Vask's voice again. Withdraw. The soldiers backed out one by one, weapons lowering, expressions caught somewhere between relief and humiliation. When the bridge doors finally sealed behind them, Braxis exhaled slowly and allowed himself, for just a moment, to lean against the console and feel the exhaustion he'd been hiding since the boarding began. That was either very brave or very stupid, Ilra's voice said from the doorway. She'd arrived in the middle of the standoff, hand hovering near her own weapon, and had watched the entire thing unfold without daring to intervene. Ask me again once I know which, Braxis said. She helped him rebuild the corrupted data core that night, the 2 of them alone in the records bay while the rest of the ship slept. Or, in the Iron Star's case, whatever passed for sleep in a vessel that never fully powered down. Ilra brought old data recovery protocols she'd learned as a cadet, dense and clumsy compared to modern coalition tools, but Braxis recognized the underlying architecture the moment he saw it. These aren't coalition designs, he said, watching her work. Not originally. They're old, Ilra admitted. Foundational. Nobody really questions where they came from. They're just part of how our systems work. Baseline infrastructure. Braxis studied the code scrolling past, something unreadable moving behind his eyes. I designed something almost exactly like this, before the war. Ilra's hand stilled over the console. She didn't say anything because there wasn't anything to say that wouldn't sound absurd out loud. That pieces of her galaxy's most basic technology, threaded invisibly through every system she'd ever used, might trace back to a species erased so thoroughly that even their fingerprints had been filed down into anonymous background noise. "Just get the file open," Braxis said quietly. "Please." It took another hour of careful, patient work, but eventually the corrupted core yielded, and a fragment of the old recording flickered back to life. Not the whole message. The file was too damaged for that, but enough. Braxis's old commander, exhausted, hollow-eyed, speaking into a recorder that would apparently outlive him by centuries. "Vornak's fleet is broken. Their homeworld's defenses are gone. We could end it here, wipe them out to the last ship, and God knows they'd have done the same to us without a second thought." The recording stuttered, skipped forward. "Decided not to. The coalition delegates are already calling it a mistake. Mercy, they say, is a weakness we can't afford to broadcast to the rest of the galaxy. So we made a choice instead. Nobody outside this room will ever know what Earth did here. That's the price they're asking. Our name. For their silence." The recording died again, corrupted beyond recovery, the screen dissolving into meaningless static no matter how many times Ilra tried to coax it back. Braxis sat very still for a long moment. "We won," he said finally quietly, like he barely believed it himself. "We won, and then we let them erase us for it." "Why would anyone agree to that?" Ilra asked. "I don't know yet," Braxis admitted, "but I intend to find out." 2 decks away, in a private communications suite sealed against coalition monitoring protocols, Vask sat alone, his earlier composure entirely gone. His hands were folded tightly on the desk in front of him, knuckles pale, as a heavily encrypted channel connected to a recipient whose identity the console deliberately declined to display. "He's not what the briefing said he'd be," Vask said quietly. "He knows the old charters. He knows the Accord's legal architecture even without the name. If he pulls the wrong thread, then make sure he doesn't," the voice on the other end replied, calm, patient, and utterly without warmth. "You were given clear instructions when this ship was detected, Admiral. Contain it, silence it. The Accord does not survive scrutiny, and neither, I suspect, does the peace we've all enjoyed because of it." "There's a sub-prefect helping him," Vask said. "Chesto. She's already found the redacted charter section." A pause. "Then she is now part of the problem too." Vask closed his eyes briefly before answering. "Understood." He ended the call and sat alone in the dim light for a long moment, the weight of what he'd just agreed to settling over him like a physical thing. Whatever the Silence Accord actually was, he realized now, it was bigger and older and far more dangerous than mere political embarrassment. Someone, somewhere, had been protecting it for centuries, and they were not going to stop now. Back on the bridge, unaware of the conversation happening 2 decks below, Braxis and Ilra finally managed to isolate the last recoverable fragment of the corrupted log, the file compiling slowly, agonizingly, on the screen in front of them. Before either of them could open it, the Iron Star's proximity alarms tore through the ship in a sudden screaming wail, sensors flooding with new contacts, dozens of them, resolving out of stealth all around Vathan's watch in perfect, disciplined formation. A hail came through on an old encrypted frequency Braxis's console recognized instantly despite the centuries, a frequency that shouldn't have existed anymore, from a ship that shouldn't have known his name. "Iron Star, this is the lead vessel of the Third Fleet," a deep, ancient voice said. "Stand down your weapons and prepare to receive contact." The voice paused, and when it spoke again, it used a rank that had not appeared on a single coalition record in over 800 years. A rank that, as far as any archive in the galaxy was concerned, had never existed at all. "We have been waiting a long time for this moment, Fleet Marshal Kell." The being on the other end of the transmission was unlike anything Ilra had ever seen in a briefing file, and she had seen briefing files on nearly every known species in Coalition space. He was tall, even by the standards of his own kind, with skin the color of weathered stone and eyes that held the unmistakable, unhurried patience of someone who had been alive far longer than any single lifetime should allow. He wore no obvious insignia, no elaborate uniform, nothing that marked rank the way Coalition officers did. And yet every soldier on the bridge behind him, dozens of them visible in the background of the feed, stood at an attention so rigid it bordered on reverence. Grand Marshal Taven Osk, Braxis said slowly, reading the identification tag scrolling across his display. That's not a title I recognize. No, Osk agreed, his voice deep and unhurried, carrying the weight of centuries in every syllable. It wouldn't be. It's older than your ship's records, Commander. Older, I suspect, than you'd believe if I simply told you. Try me, Braxis said. I've had a very educational few days. Something that might have been the ghost of a smile crossed Osk's weathered face. Very well. Then let me finish what your fleet commander's recording could not. Ilra stiffened. You know about that recording? I was there, Osk said simply, and the words landed on the bridge like a physical weight. I was a junior officer at the choke point battle your commander recorded, Sub-Prefect. I watched your species, humanity, stand at the edge of annihilation and choose mercy anyway, when every rational calculation said they should have chosen slaughter instead. Braxis's jaw tightened. The Vornax Dominion. The Vornax Dominion was not merely an enemy of Earth, Osk said. It was a threat to every species within 100 light-years, including my own. We were losing, Commander. All of us. Your people arrived at a war that was never theirs to fight, and they fought it anyway. And when the moment came to end the Vornax utterly, to erase them the way they had erased so many others, your commanders chose not to. Why does that matter now? Ilra asked. Why does that require erasing an entire species from history? Oska's expression darkened, the patience in his eyes giving way briefly to something heavier. Because Earth paid a price for that mercy that nearly ended them. Your homeworld was left in ruins, Commander. Your population, decimated past any hope of quick recovery. The handful of survivors who remained made an agreement with the species they had just saved, an agreement my own government helped broker and has spent every year since regretting. The silence accord, Ilra said quietly. Yes. Osk inclined his head. In exchange for the aid your people desperately needed to survive, medical, industrial, generational, Earth's role in the war and eventually Earth itself would be erased from every galactic record. Officially, for humanity's protection. Unofficially. He paused, choosing his words with visible care. Unofficially. Because there were those among the victors who could not bear to be remembered as the ones who let a broken, desperate species carry the moral weight they themselves had failed to carry. It was easier to erase the mirror than to look into it. Braxis stood very still, hands clenched at his sides, absorbing the shape of a truth he'd been chasing for days, and had never once expected to be this cruel. My people, he said slowly, won a war that saved this entire region of the galaxy, and your ancestors repaid them by erasing every trace that they'd ever existed. Yes, Osk said, without flinching from it. And I have spent 300 years believing that debt would simply be carried by history and quietly forgotten, the way such debts usually are. He straightened, and something changed in his bearing, the weariness giving way suddenly to urgency. I would not have broken silence now, Commander, whatever guilt I carry if the matter were not urgent. What's happened? Ilra asked, dread already coiling in her stomach. The Vornax Dominion was never fully destroyed, Osk said. A remnant survived the final battle, scattered, broken, but alive. We believed them extinct within a generation. We were wrong. They have spent centuries rebuilding in the dark, patient in a way we underestimated, and 3 days ago, the same day your ship was detected entering Coalition space, our deep-range sensors confirmed a fleet formation matching their signature, moving toward this sector in numbers we have not seen since the war your people ended. The bridge went silent. "How large?" Braxis said, though something in his voice suggested he already suspected the answer wouldn't be good. "Large enough," Osk said quietly, "that the coalition in its current state will not survive first contact." Ilra felt the floor tilt beneath her, though the ship hadn't moved at all. She thought of Vask's soldiers, of the redacted charter, of the archivist who'd vanished decades ago for asking questions. An entire apparatus built around burying a truth that suddenly, catastrophically, the galaxy needed more than it had ever needed anything. "That's why you're here," she said. "Not just to explain, to warn us. To warn. I am here," Osk said. "Because your ship, Commander Kell, was built for exactly this moment. It was never lost. It was hidden, deliberately, carefully, as a seed. A failsafe, meant to wake only if the Accord's protections ever failed, and the galaxy needed reminding of what your people once did for us." He paused. "I did not expect to see it wake in my lifetime. I am relieved, and I am terrified, in equal measure." Braxis turned to the main console, his face unreadable, processing the enormity of everything he'd just learned in the space of a single conversation. His homeworld, ruined. His species, erased not by accident but by shame. His ship, not a stranded relic but a deliberate weapon, planted centuries ago and left to sleep until the exact crisis now unfolding around them. "You said seed," he said slowly, turning back to the screen. "Not weapon. Seed." Something flickered across Osk's weathered features. Not quite hope, but close to it. "Yes, Commander, because the Iron Star was never meant to fight this war alone." Before Osk could explain further, the console in front of Braxis lit up on its own. Unprompted, lines of ancient code scrolling faster than either he or Ilra could read. The ship's automated systems, recognizing something in the Vornak signature pattern that Osk's warning had just confirmed, had made a decision neither of them had authorized. A ship-wide broadcast began transmitting outward from the Iron Star, threading through frequencies so old the Coalition's monitoring systems didn't even register them as active channels, reaching out across the galaxy toward dozens of other locations, each one silent and forgotten for centuries, and one by one scattered across star systems no one in the room had ever heard of. Something ancient and patient began, at last, to answer back. The tactical display filled with red before anyone on the bridge had time to brace for it. The Vornak's remnant fleet dropped out of stealth at the edge of the system in a formation too disciplined to be desperate and too massive to be anything but a statement. Hundreds of vessels, dark-hulled and silent, arranged with the patient precision of an enemy that had spent centuries preparing for exactly this moment. Coalition ships scrambled into defensive positions around Vathan's watch, their formations ragged, uncertain, crewed by officers who had trained for border skirmishes and diplomatic escorts, never for an extinction-level engagement. "They're not testing our defenses," Braxis said, watching the numbers climb. "They're not even bothering to feel us out. They know exactly how outmatched we are." Ilra stood at his shoulder, watching Coalition command channels erupt into chaos, voices overlapping in panic across every frequency. Vask's voice cut through eventually, hoarse, stripped of its usual polish. "All units, defensive posture, do not engage." He stopped himself, and even through the comm static, Ilra could hear the moment his composure finally broke entirely. "We are not prepared for this." "No," Braxis said quietly, more to himself than to anyone listening. "You're not. But I've done this before." He turned to the console, and for the first time since waking in that cryopod, Ilra watched something settle over him completely. Not fear, not grief, but a terrible, focused calm, the look of a man stepping into the exact shape of who he had always been trained to be. "Iron Star," he said. "Old exercises. Falcon Protocol. Full activation." The ship answered instantly, weapons arrays rotating into configurations Ilra had never seen in any Coalition manual, engines humming with a depth of power that made the deck plating vibrate beneath her boots. "You're one ship," she said. "Against that." "I'm not one ship," Braxis said, eyes fixed on the display, where dozens of new contacts were now blinking into existence across the tactical grid. Old signal beacons, scattered across a dozen systems, answering the Iron Star's call and beginning slowly to move. They weren't much, most of them. Small outposts, aging support vessels, a handful of ships barely larger than shuttles, hidden away centuries ago as quiet contingencies nobody had ever expected to actually use. But they moved with the same disciplined precision Braxis did, the same unmistakable signature of a species that had once long ago learned exactly how to make the most of not having enough. They were never gone, Osk's voice said over the comm, quiet with something like wonder. Scattered, sleeping, waiting for the one signal that would ever have woken them. On the bridge, Vask's voice came through again. No longer angry, no longer political. Just a man staring at a battle he had no idea how to win, willing to take help from wherever it came. Kel, whatever you're doing, do it faster. Copy, Braxis said, and for just a moment something almost like a smile crossed his face. Chesto, you wanted to know what we're capable of. Strap in. What followed was not a battle so much as a demonstration. The Iron Star threading impossible gaps between Vornax formations, drawing fire meant for the fragile coalition fleet, and turning it back with tactics no modern doctrine had a name for. It scattered sister ships arriving in staggered waves that broke the enemy's rhythm again and again, never enough to win outright, but always enough to buy one more minute, one more maneuver, one more chance for the rest of the fleet to hold the line. Ilra found herself relaying coordinates, translating tactics on the fly for coalition captains too stunned to keep up, watching Vask, humiliated, terrified, but no longer arguing, follow orders coming from a ship that, 3 days ago, he had tried to seize by force. She watched the Iron Star take hit after hit and keep moving, armor scarred anew over scars centuries old, refusing simply to stop. It was not overwhelming force that turned the battle. It was time. Enough time, bought at terrible cost for the full weight of the coalition fleet to finally arrive from neighboring sectors, drawn by an emergency signal that Osk himself had authorized the moment the Vornax formation was confirmed. When they did, the Vornax remnant, battered, overextended, no longer facing a fractured and unprepared enemy, broke formation and retreated into the dark from which they'd come. The silence that followed felt louder than the battle itself. Grand Marshal Osk stood before the assembled coalition leadership 3 days later, in a chamber that had not seen this many high-ranking officials gathered in one place in generations, and did something no one in that room had expected any of them to live long enough to witness. He told them everything: the war, the mercy, the debt, the accord, and the shame that had quietly festered beneath its polished justification for centuries, hardening into something that had nearly gotten an entire galaxy destroyed, rather than let old guilt be spoken aloud. He did not soften it, and he did not ask forgiveness for his part in it. He simply ended it, formally, publicly, striking down an agreement that had outlived any purpose beyond protecting the comfort of those who'd written it. Humanity's name was restored to the historical record that same day, not as a footnote, not as a curious anomaly, but as what it had always been, a founding pillar of a peace that generations of coalition citizens had enjoyed without ever knowing its true cost. Vask did not resign in the end. He requested reassignment instead to a quiet border post far from Fleet Command, and before he left, he found Braxis alone on the Iron Star's bridge and said the only thing that seemed to matter anymore. "I was wrong about you," he said. "I'm sorry it took almost getting everyone killed to see it." "You did what you thought your duty required," Braxis said. "So did I. We're not so different." Vask didn't answer that. He simply nodded once and left. When the coalition offered Braxis any honor within their power to give, titles, monuments, a seat among their highest command, he asked for none of it. "I want to know if there's anyone else," he said. "Any other humans? Anywhere. And I want to see what's left of Earth." Ilra, standing beside him on the bridge that had become more familiar to her in a few short weeks than her own quarters back on Vathan's watch, didn't hesitate. "I'm coming with you," she said. It wasn't a question, and he didn't treat it like one. The Iron Star set its course for a homeworld its commander hadn't seen in centuries. Engines humming with the same patient strength that had carried it through a war nobody remembered, and a battle nobody had expected it to survive. As the stars began to blur past the viewport, the ship's old damaged log system flickered on one final time, unprompted, and began to play. Not the corrupted fragment Braxis had chased for days, but something whole. Something the ship itself had been quietly repairing in the silence of the long journey home. His old commander's face appeared on the screen, tired and worn but steady, recording a message meant for whoever woke the ship next, whenever that day might come. If you're hearing this, it means the accord finally ended one way or another. Good. It should have ended a long time ago. A pause, heavy with something that might have been grief or might have been pride, or perhaps both at once. We didn't do what we did to be remembered. We did it because it was right, and because someone had to, and because that's what we decided we would be, even at the end of everything. If you're hearing this, then maybe now it's someone else's turn to be brave. The message ended. The bridge fell quiet, save for the low, steady hum of a ship that had waited 300 years to finally come home. Braxis stood at the viewport a long moment, watching the stars streak past, and for the first time since waking in that frozen pod, allowed himself, quietly, to hope.